you can kind of predict that when they feel a threat to their control, that's when they're going to start acting out.
If you have ever felt like conflict with certain people just kind of follow the same path, you always see this sort of predictable escalation. You bring up a concern, you set a boundary, you say no, you stop over explaining something, and suddenly everything escalates. The person just gets more mad. You see, a crisis starts or blame starts or other people get pulled in. In many high conflict dynamics, this is what happens. It feels very scripted. And I want to talk about why this happens, how this happens, if they know what they're doing. And my guest today is someone that I have truly wanted to have this conversation with for a long time. Some books that I have read a long time ago that have been very helpful in my own journey. But he is a lawyer, a therapist, a mediator, and truly one of the leading voices in understanding high conflict personalities and conflict escalation patterns. So I'm so happy to have Bill Eddy here with me today. And I would love to kind of just kick this over to you. I know I've bragged about you a little bit, but I want to give you some space to introduce yourself and tell everyone in your own words about the work that you do.
Great, thanks. I'll let you do the bragging and I'll just say what it is. But yeah, so first I was a social worker, became a therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, then became a lawyer because I really liked solving family conflicts in the legal setting and emphasized mediation. So all three of those have influenced me, and crossing over with them helped me really understand high conflict personalities in legal disputes, especially in family law and divorce. So I started realizing that patterns I saw as a therapist with mental health issues were showing up in court as high conflict. And I realized that high conflict families were talked about, but in my mind, they weren't high conflict families. They were high conflict individuals. Some families had one, some two, some three, and we needed to understand the individuals to be able to make a difference. And so as a therapist, lawyer, mediator, it really helped me to manage, I think, and resolve disputes and divorces by understanding what's going on. So that's kind of my background, covers about 40 years there, dozen years as a therapist, 15 years in family court as a lawyer, and 15 years doing mediation with some overlap of all three of these. So it's about a 40-year career, and I think I've learned something.
I'm sure you have. I once hosted an online webinar called Emotionally Bulletproof Kids, and it was meant to educate and teach people how to help their children become confident and feel resilient going through these abusive family dynamics. And I remember when I was looking for people to be on that webinar, was like, I want a lawyer and I want a therapist, and they all have to understand that, lawyers say things that you can't do. A therapist would say, never do that. Or a therapist would tell you to do something that your lawyer would tell you never to do. And in hindsight, you should have been on that panel because you get it from all sides. You'd have been perfect for it.
It's amazing. And there are different viewpoints that have something to contribute.
Yes.
So I tried to pull those together in my work.
Yeah. I think you've done a phenomenal job at that and just understanding the escalation. What you said about family court in particular, and I mean, the episode's not about family court, but in family court, you see this sort of like, okay, there's conflict happening in front of me. This is a high conflict situation. And you are saying, hold on, this is probably a high conflict individual in a lot of cases. And that's a very important distinction, I think.
Absolutely. And I think understanding which type of high conflict individual also helps to kind of see the patterns of behavior and how to influence the patterns of behavior. Because the goal is always to help people kind of calm down, resolve their conflicts, and feel better and grow, and especially help the kids. I mean, That's really the goal. That's really the goal. I might mention, so putting this all together, then I started High Conflict Institute with a woman, Megan Hunter, who also was working in family law. And so we put our heads together and said, we need to do a lot of training of family law professionals, lawyers, therapists, mediators, judges, etc. So that's been a lot of how it all came together. That was 2008. It's now 2026. So we're 18 years old teaching people about these patterns. And people are still surprised because they go, oh, that's what's going on. So I'm glad to talk about it.
Yeah, shouted from the rooftops. You said the word calm, and I find something really interesting that the calm is something I've been talking about a lot lately in covert abuse tactics, because the reasonable person could, in fact, be the most dangerous person in the room, somebody who just appears calm. And I think that that can sometimes be used right before the escalation. And I think it can feel really shocking for some people that are experiencing it, but it's not a random thing. It's something is sort of brewing. We feel the tension. We feel our body kind of, oh, something's about to happen. That's part of it. Sometimes your nervous system just knows that calm means some escalation is about to happen.
It could be. And so we want to get to things being calm, but you're also right that calm often precedes the escalation and often catches people way off guard. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? Can you predict some of how that's going to begin? And to some extent you can, but I see different types too. There's like three main patterns that I see with high conflict people and their escalation process. My business partner, Megan Hunter, says different operating systems. And so we're not judgmental. We have to deal with them. And so I'm going to use terms that in the extreme are personality disorders, but the personality patterns. So there's a borderline personality pattern, which tends to be kind of a roller coaster, up and down, loving, wonderful, and then enraged and angry, and then loving, wonderful again, and then enraged and angry again. So that's borderline. Then there's the narcissistic pattern. And I talk about these as patterns. Some people have a pattern, some have a disorder. The disorder doesn't matter. If you have this pattern, it's helpful to be aware of it and how to respond. So the narcissistic pattern, which is basically I'm superior. And as long as I'm superior and everyone sees me as superior, I'm doing fine and I can be somewhat mellow or whatever. But if somebody else threatens that, then I have to prove again that I'm superior, and that's where their escalation begins. And then there's the one called antisocial. And the antisocial is one that really wants domination, really wants power and control. This is the most power and control personality. And so when they have power and control, everything's fine, no problem. But if they feel they're losing that, then they can be really extreme and they can be more conscious of control, whereas someone with a narcissistic or borderline may be more reactive. It's like, oh, this is happening, I don't like it. But antisocial person may be, I'm gonna get her on it. I'm gonna get her tomorrow when she's not expecting it. That kind of more calculating thinking. Some people say, kind of like a cobra or something. I'm going to get ready to strike when I'm ready. So cold anger versus hot anger, which is more the borderline reactive response.
Would you say antisocial is a little more Machiavellian, perhaps?
Yeah, because it's more conscious. It's not like loss of emotional control. And when you said earlier, someone can look really reasonable, this is the personality that's the best at hiding what they're really feeling. And so they can look really reasonable. And even in family court, when I'm dealing with family court cases, they can be some of the most reasonable looking people. And yet it's calculated. And often they're very good at persuading people. I'm the reasonable person. Hey, you gotta do what I'm asking for.
Which is so brutal. It's hard because I think the survivor knows what this is, but it's hard to get other people to see it. Why do you think survivors are so good at predicting these patterns of calm and then escalation?
I think it depends. For many survivors, they grew up with somebody like this. And so they kind of know this pattern. And sad, but often trying to get away from that with their partner and somehow ending up with a partner with a similar pattern. So they know it. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, people that never dealt with a pattern like this until their own relationship, and then they started learning how it works. And generally, there is an escalation and a de-escalation. But think of all three of these patterns as really wanting to have control. They feel insecure. Whatever reason is they want to be in control, more control than most people need to function on a daily basis. They need to control the people around them to feel okay. And some of them were abused as kids. and grew up learning the only way I'm safe is to control everybody around me, control my partner, control the kids. So the big thing with the pattern is think of is if there's a loss of control, if someone's criticizing me, if someone's threatening my relationship, if someone's threatening my dominance, then that's where they get started. So if you think of the beginning of that, like you might have bad news to give your partner, and when they get bad news, they usually do XYZ. Some people take off and disappear for a week. Some people lash out and start hitting the person with the bad news. Some people are like, well, I'm going to tell the world you're a jerk. And they spread something false on the internet. So you can kind of predict that when they feel a threat to their control, that's when they're going to start acting out.
I hate that. And I certainly was my experience. I feel like it often follows a little bit of a script, and what are some of the common steps that you see these high conflict patterns or high conflict personalities move through when they feel their control is challenged?
First of all, they're verbally trying to stop the loss of control. So they may just be, for someone with a borderline personality, they often attack you as a bad person, an evil person, an uncaring person. You're just a terrible person. A narcissist says you're an idiot, you're inferior, no one will ever like you or respect you. Antisocial person will say, I'm all there is for you. You don't need anybody else but me. And if you're threatening me, you're going to be out in the cold in the world. No one's going to care about you. You're lost, totally lost. So I think a lot of it's the verbal to try to prevent that loss of control by attacking the person and their behavior, that then they'll go, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I won't leave after all. One of the most dangerous times is when someone says, I want to leave you, I want to end our relationship. And the chances of injury then really go up. It's like 7 times more risk of violence or harm at a time of separation, because that's loss of control for these personalities. So I would say verbal for some, physical response. Some may go, well, then I'll punish you. I'm going to take away your phone, or I'm going to take away your money, or I'm going to take away the kids. I'm going to take something from you. And I've heard people say that. It's like, I feel like I have to take something from you. And it's often the kids. And so that's kind of part of it. So there's the verbal reaction, then there's taking some kind of punishing action. And that can just grow. Depends on how the other person responds, but that can grow. The more threatened they feel, the more they have to be excessively controlling, and that's the pattern. And then if they start feeling back in control, then they calm down. It's like you say, I'm sorry, I won't leave, I'll stay. Then they calm down, but then it's like the threat of leaving is still hanging there, and they may escalate again. But a lot of it goes with that particular person, and especially if they have one of these 3 styles of personality, that they react either with hot anger, with superiority, or with calculating response.
Yeah. And all are awful.
Yes.
I've heard people say things like, oh, narcissists are the worst, or like they're all terrible. Okay. All of these patterns are bad in their own ways. And even the individuals who display these behaviors are still human beings who behave in a variety of ways. But I feel like so many women say, I something flew out of my mouth. I said this and I knew that he was going to react to this way. I knew that whatever was about to happen, because we see the cycle. And even when things calm down, calm is sort of a loose word. When things are, temporarily calm, sometimes that is part of the pattern, right? It goes back to you complied or submit to something, and then, okay, they're calm, but just wait.
Well, and it's interesting because these patterns vary a little bit. So like the borderline pattern may get a sense, my upset isn't working, and my anger, so I'm going to anger, and that isn't working. So now I'm going to be loving and come back. And there's a term some people use, they call it hoovering. And that hoovering is getting the person back, sucking them back in when there's a separation going on. And it's like, oh, okay. And that's not unusual, that they'll try anything. but don't believe that. That's to feel secure again, to get the relationship back. It's not part of accepting the end of a relationship or having to change. That's another thing. You expect them to change. That's loss of control. It's like, I can't do that because I have to be in charge, and the person who's in charge and superior shouldn't have to change.
Yeah, I'm right. That kind of framing. Yeah. Nothing will change that. I know that has been made crystal clear to me over the years, right? That people who feel this way are very set in being right. Boundaries is something that I see very difficult for people. And I know that there's a million YouTube videos about how to set boundaries. I think none of those things work because consequences are, I'm going to say difficult, but I really mean half-time impossible with someone like this, because there's a consequence or a punishment, at least when you're in it, to changing your own behavior and not tolerating things anymore. And ultimately, it's a loss of control, and that's the reason. But something that's like healthy, saying no and having boundaries and having personal autonomy, pulling back, protecting yourself, this gets experienced as a threat to these people.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm losing control, because if you're setting a boundary on me, then that means you don't see me as a superior person. You don't see me as in charge. You don't see me as having to be respected and admired and just seen as the end all. So, like, for example, let's say someone says, my sister's having a party this weekend and I want to go. And the man says, well, I don't want to go. And well, then I'll just go on my own. No, if I'm all you need, you don't need your sister. I'm supposed to be everything you need. So you can't go. If I'm not going, you can't go. And I don't want to go. And it's like, well, I'm going to go anyway. Well, that's a super threat, because I'm not in this total position of being in charge. And so that's the kind of boundaries. Like, I'm going to go. You can find something to do. But the question then comes in, and you mentioned this word consequences, because I teach a lot about boundaries and consequences, and even have a book called Slick Solutions, Setting Limits and Imposing Consequences. And the thing is, with high conflict people, they ignore your limits. So you always have to think ahead, what will my consequence be if they ignore my limits? And so you have to think, first of all, is it safe? Is my consequence safe? What if I say, well, then I'm not going to bake a cake for your birthday if you don't let me go to my sister's birthday? Well, if that's the consequence, that's outrageous, and I'm going to punish you for saying that or doing that. So you have to think through, is my consequence safe? You have to think through, does it fit the situation? You have to think through, am I ready to impose this consequence? And do I need help imposing this consequence? So, like in divorce cases, it may be needing the court to issue a restraining order if someone can't respect such and such. So, setting limits and imposing consequences is always hard with high conflict people, because they really think they're above all of that.
Yeah. What you're saying just brought this memory of, it's shocking that I can laugh about this now because it's so not funny, but my abuser was hitting me. And eventually I called the police, not the first time and not even the worst time. It was just that it kept happening. So I called the police, and it was like, I can't believe you would call the police. You betrayed me. I can't believe. But like, I asked you to stop, which is wild that we even have to ask such a thing. But my consequence, my boundary was just continually breached. So I decided the consequence was, you're not listening to me. So I need to take it one level further, which is I need police involvement. But that was a betrayal. That was the worst thing I ever could have done in his eyes. And it's like, you could have just seen me as a person and not continued the behavior. But not continuing the behavior meant that he would have to admit that he was wrong or change his behavior. You see this constantly. If they're so unwilling to see themselves as even part of the problem, let alone the problem, because they're the ones essentially choosing to be abusive.
Yeah, that's the thing, is they don't connect their behavior to what happens to them. So it's all your fault. It's like,
right.
Well, you shouldn't have called the police rather than I shouldn't have hit you. That
right.
kind of thing, that thinking. And they don't connect the dots back to themselves, and you can't make them connect the dots back to themselves. So rather than trying to give them insight into their own behavior, it's better to talk about what the options are now. And so you're focusing on the future, not the past. You're focusing on choices, not insight. And that's important in dealing with someone like this. And sometimes they accept, okay, she called the police. I had to go down there. There was a hearing and, maybe there's a temporary restraining order or something. And so they accept that kind of. If you bring it up, they'll get in touch with that upset again about it. But you don't need to bring it up unless there's something new happening. And that's something people don't realize is don't bring up controversial past behavior unless you really need to, because their emotions then reopen and you get the whole thing back again.
Yeah, the rage goes back high level. It seems so counterproductive to not bring it up. I know, having been in it, it's like you want to explain because you think this person just doesn't understand that they're hurting me. They just don't understand that it's their behavior that's causing this. So you want to say, your behavior has caused this problem. And if you would just, but they see that as such a threat and rejection, or, if it's happening publicly, I imagine even humiliation.
All of that. And they don't get the point you're making. They're not able to get that insight that something's connected to their behavior. Because all of these high conflict people picture themselves as victims in the world, that things just happen to them. They're not responsible for anything. And so it may seem really bizarre that someone who's being abusive only feels like a victim, but because they have that lens on the world, they really don't absorb, hey, I shouldn't have done that.
It was justified. I think that so many of them are just issuing the justified consequences of you not complying. It's your fault.
Yeah. And they often say, well, I had to do that because of what you said or what you did. And it's always, they're very quick to put the blame on somebody else. And so they don't learn and they don't change, but they do change from the consequences. So that restraining order that happened, a temporary restraining order, does get through to some extent and may make it less likely in the future that they're going to do that. It depends on the person. Some just don't even get that. And some, of course, are angrier.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You just piss them off for getting a restraining order. I once did some loose research for a video that I wanted to make because I just mentioned a restraining order in a video, and so many comments from women who'd been through this were like, a piece of paper. A restraining order doesn't do anything. They're hard to get. They don't work. And I was like, is that true? Do restraining orders not work? That's information I want. I've had a restraining order and it didn't work. So I thought I was the outlier, but I am. What I read, and this is not me quoting actual statistics, but something like 75% of restraining orders work in the sense that it reduces or removes harm. However, that obviously leaves 25%. And my theory, based on nothing, is that I think it is mostly narcissistic and antisocial types, not all, but most, in the sense that they just don't care. Antisocial tends to not care about the law. Consequences don't matter. They're above that. The superiority or grandiosity sort of makes them like, that's just a piece of paper.
Well, I would agree with you. Plus, I would say borderline. Borderline men, the restraining order keeps them away from their attachment. The issue for borderline is attachment. And this is for men and women. There's men with borderline personalities and women with borderline personality. All of this stuff isn't really a gender thing. It's a personality thing. It's just there's more men antisocials, more men as narcissists, and about equal men and women with borderline personalities. But it's about attachment. And so if there's a restraining order, they're desperate for their attachment. And so they often violate a restraining order to feel connected and to try to talk the person out of it and say, I'm at your doorstep because please, you misunderstanding me. I love you. I care about you. That was a mistake I made. I shouldn't have thrown that or hit you or whatever it was. So their personality violates restraining orders also some of the time. It's a question of how extreme they are. And so your statistics may be accurate, but 25% is a lot of people. And a restraining order is just a piece of paper. So there has to be other things like the police picking the person up if they violate it, which didn't used to happen. But now you're more able to get that. You're at my doorstep. You're violating the restraining order. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to call the police if you don't leave immediately. And
Yeah.
they say, but wait, let me talk. Let me come in. Let me have a conversation with you.
Yeah. You don't understand. Let me explain why I was so abusive. I mean, they don't use that word about themselves, I realize, but even restraining orders can cause this escalation for these types as well. And I know it's this common thing of if somebody is abusing you, kick them out, get a restraining order. But there are circumstances where getting a restraining order will escalate it further. I've seen that.
Yes. So the thing is, what are the consequences? What are the restraints? If the person knows the police, she's going to call the police if I knock on the door at her place, then they may decide not to do that. But they want to do that. And it's a question of whether they restrain themselves or have to be picked up and restrained. And that's sometimes a night in jail is the consequence that gets their attention, because the restraining order itself is hard for them to accept. So people have to be ready to enforce it. One of the worst things is if you have a restraining order that says no contact, you stay away a certain distance, no phone contact, etc., and he calls up and you answer the phone and you talk to him, you're diminishing the restraining order because you're violating it with him. And that happens so often. Well, I just felt like I needed to just hear him out, or I needed to tell him why it was important to me to get that. And it's like, no, if that's who's calling, don't answer the phone. Don't violate that, because that shows how firm you're planning to be. And ironically, firmness often shows them the limit more than if they can talk you into talking to them.
What a catch-22. Holding firm will help eventually have them stop, but they're relentless when you hold firm. So they escalate, but it's still important to do. And the more firm you can be, like I know therapy is a luxury and a privilege, but if you can get into therapy or support groups or, coaching or just anything that will help you regulate and create some nervous system safety and strengthen up some boundaries and overcome some, beliefs about holding consequences and those things. It's such good work to do so that you can be, I hate the word stronger here, but, be stronger to get through maintaining boundaries.
And they take your boundary more seriously. One of the things that's important to know is don't go back and forth. So if you get a restraining order and then you say, oh, okay, and I'll go to court and try to get it lifted or something like that, and then something else happens, you get your next one. First of all, it may make it harder to get your next one, but he's not going to respect that. He's going to figure, I can talk her out of this. And so if you go back and forth, it weakens the boundary, but it also may increase their emotional intensity. And that's where we see people really get hurt, is when they've been ambivalent and the person goes, well, I thought we were getting back together, and so it looks like we're not. And that's where you have people being murdered and stuff. It's like, don't let this escalate by going back and forth. If you're being firm, stay firm and move step by step. And of course, get assistance, get help. People, like you said, a therapist.
Now, what's interesting is I am the poster child for what you just described of what not to do, because I was relatively ambivalent. I was like, in fact, I didn't go to get a restraining order. Where I live, when you file for domestic abuse, it's an automatic restraining order, which I very quickly breached. However, the order allowed contact specifically to talk about children. And that just became like we can talk about anything. And it escalated, and then he was begging me to drop it, and I didn't. Luckily, I had the good sense not to drop it. But it was like, I was still ambivalent about it, and I was still and so that led him to think, well, I can get away with more, and more abuse happened. So it's really, we're talking about restraining orders, but boundaries even. That a restraining order is a very clear third-party boundary of you cannot do certain things. And if you breach it yourself, you are essentially inviting the other person to do it. And I know that it's hard, and I don't blame people for being ambivalent about it. I know, I really know how hard it is, but it's still really important to stay strong and power through those moments and hold firm.
That's true. Like you said, with any boundary, not just a restraining order, if you say, I'm not going to do something, and that's your boundary or your limit, is you need to follow through with that, because if you, okay, well, I'll do it anyway, that's where now you've taught them that you don't really stick with your boundaries and that they can talk you out of anything.
Yes.
And you don't want to teach that lesson.
No. No, it's very, I find that what people say is, no, but, like, Bill, you don't understand. He gets worse when I have boundaries. He gets worse when, and I always think to myself, that's the point, right? If you try to assert yourself and assert what they see as control and you see as autonomy, they are more angry and they do escalate because they're trying even harder to maintain the status quo. But it's all the more important to hold firm yourself. And I get in the face of danger. So again, I don't know, neither of us are making this sound like it's easy or safe to do, but people always say, no, these things don't work. No, it does work. You just have to keep going.
Yes, it's consistency, repetition, etc. And what I see sometimes is people decide, okay, I'm going to separate, I'm going to get divorced. And there's this sense of relief that they have this feeling, I'm no longer ambivalent, it's clear, and now peace will come my way. And then they communicate that to their partner, and their partner's through the roof. So you got to be prepared to do this kind of in a step-by-step manner so that you're prepared for the pushback, because they're not just going to go, oh, okay, well, that's a relief. Now we know we're getting divorced. It's not like that at all. It's like you may have a sense of peace with your decision, but it's going to be a while before they accept your decision. And that's the key. And that's why you often don't want to tell them that while you're home alone with them. You may want to tell them that in a therapist's office or from some unknown location, and your attorney serves the papers and says, we're going to work on the details here, but she's in a safe place. So you need to think ahead when it gets really extreme, and separating is a time when there's much more risk.
Yes, I know. It's always a tricky thing to talk about, is the post-separation side of things, because I hear so many women say, like, post-separation abuse is worse. That's not a good sales pitch to have women leave abusive relationships or have people exit these toxic relationships. And yet I know that it's true. I have experienced it, but I know that it's true, but it's still worth leaving. It's still worth making that effort, despite how difficult they make it in post-separation, but also when you're still in the relationship. In either case, when you try to assert yourself or, you're threatening their control, one of the many things that happen is the sort of creation of a crisis, right? Like the urgency to explain something, urgency to apologize, to tell you that they're going to therapy, they got into a car accident and you need to come to them, or emotional explosions even. But there's just big dramatic crises that seem to pop up. Where do you feel like that fits into the pattern of how they escalate?
I think it's very much part of the pattern that it's that other way to control. If I can't control physically, then I'm going to control emotionally. And saying, like, I just had an accident is a brilliant move to go, who's going to not care about someone that just had an accident? That's their thinking. And that's going to pull your heartstrings, and you're going to go, well, this once because they had an accident. And now you've moved back in with them and are taking care of them. And that's the not holding firm. So when you're holding firm, you got to say, you had an accident, call your sister. But I'm no longer the person for you for when anything goes wrong. So sorry, I can't do that. So it's thinking ahead. That's part of it, is thinking ahead, what the scenarios are and being prepared for each of them. And for many people, it doesn't get worse after separation because they've built so many boundaries to protect themselves. And that's where not just having a therapist, having a lawyer, you can talk to what kind of boundaries, all of that. So you're not drawn back in and unprotected.
It's obviously hard, but it's necessary, to really do that. I think, going back to even the consciousness of some of this behavior, when they're creating a crisis of any kind or creating a big dramatic emotional reaction to suck you back in, I think, and I jokingly call it bespoke abuse, because I think that they are often so calculated that they know, that relentlessly talking at you, peppering you with questions or an interrogation or begging or something, that works. For others, the silent treatment just kills you. And that leads the victim or survivor to go back because they're being stonewalled. I would have loved to have been stonewalled. I was always getting the relentless talking at you, and it just made me mental. But they do what works for you. So if a crisis wouldn't work on you, they won't use that. They might use something else. They might use a third party, pulling in your friends and family. They know that your mom will side with them or their mom or something. So they'll bring in other people, children, lawyers, therapists, whatever. Why does that work, do you think, the third party recruitment?
Because it plays again on your heartstrings. So let's say your sister says, well, he's a good guy. He's got a decent job. He's handsome. Why not give it another chance? Why are you just leaving? What about this, and this? And it's going to be hard for you. It was hard enough to set limits on your partner. Now you've got to, deal with your sister who has an inside route to your heart, who's believing all this stuff and having to explain and having to ask for support in my decision. And most family members will, but they don't understand it at first. And so that's where they can get manipulated into, would you go talk to her and tell her to come back to me? And it's like, oh, she told you goodbye? Well, yeah, I think you should give it another chance. And family members need to know, and especially if someone's leaving. So I have a book called Splitting, Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. Doesn't matter whether they have a disorder or not, it's the pattern of behavior. But what I put in Splitting is to let your family members know that you're separating from the person. So it's not a surprise to them and they're prepared, and let them know you don't have to take sides. Just don't take action. Just be supportive for me and don't take a position and don't feel like you have to say things or convince anybody, so that you let your family, friends know that this is happening and not to get involved. Otherwise, they may just get easily sucked in.
Yes, absolutely. Now, a lot of people think this is about restoring control, and it is, there's no question, but it's not just about that, right? They want to control the story, there's image management, they want to be validated and seen as not the problem. So sometimes they sort of frame it to third parties like, she's crazy and she's so mad, and they will tell a story about what happened, but miss details intentionally to frame themselves as, of course, you pointed out, they see themselves as the victim. And then people around you might agree or might fall into believing all of this crap, especially because a lot of survivors and victims don't talk to their families about what's going on because you don't want to slander your partner to them while you're together. And so when you finally say, hey, this person's abusive, it seems like, really? Kevin? He's so nice. It's shocking to people. They can pull people in so well.
Absolutely. And I think that you can warn your family, don't get involved without having to tell them all the secrets, unless you need to, unless this information is necessary. But yeah, so a lot of this is a judgment call. I think realizing the image management, so many people, it's like narcissists especially, can't accept any responsibility for a divorce. And so it has to be all her fault. So I need to prove how inferior she is and how, whatever or other. True, also, borderline antisocial may do that, but narcissists are especially invested in the image, and they want the image of a perfect marriage. And if you mess that up, it's all your fault, because I would never mess that up. That's their thinking.
Yeah. Ugh. It's just such an exhausting part of, being in these abusive relationships. There's a piece that is sort of, the aftermath of this. And I don't mean the post-separation aftermath. I mean, after a major escalation where it's explosive and anger or whatever they're doing to regain that control. After that, maybe the apology, the tears, the victimhood, blame reversal, all of it, I know I was bad, but you insert excuse here, right? That's really a huge part of the cycle too. But I think we see that as like, oh, they get it. See, he apologized. He gets it. He understands that it was bad, but we don't see it as part of the escalation or part of the cycle of abuse. How often do you see that?
Yeah. So we see that a lot. And in many ways, that pattern is a borderline pattern. And for many people, it's not violent, it's verbal. But there's an escalation of tension, then there's an explosion of rage, and then there's a period of remorse. And people go, oh, that's forever over because of the period of remorse, but it's a cycle. They call it the cycle of violence, but it isn't just violence. It may be an emotionally abusive relationship. And so it's part of the borderline pattern because they have what's called emotion dysregulation. And so they have a harder time managing emotions and things build up and then they explode. And so that pattern's very predictable. But again, that's a borderline pattern. So narcissistic pattern would be more public humiliation, embarrassment, and they have to blame their partner for that. And they may not have quite that same cycle. Likewise, the antisocial pattern is power and control at all costs. And it's kind of a straight line control pattern rather than, and they often don't have remorse. So they're not sorry they did. You deserved it. I had to do what I did. Did you? And they may try to convince you, they may try to get you to apologize for whatever it was you accidentally said before they had to beat you up and say, you can't say that around me, you're a terrible person. So you don't get the apology with all three of these. Generally, it's the borderline. All three of them, people say, which is the worst? It depends on the person. I mean, all of these personalities have committed murder in some cases, and all of these have maybe worked on themselves in some situations. But the general pattern is the power and control. And that's what they'll work hard to maintain.
What do you think survivors misunderstand about what they're actually experiencing when you look at these escalation patterns? Is there anything that you think that people are missing when they're in the throes of it?
I think victim survivors are overly self-responsible. It's like, what did I do? Why? I shouldn't have done that. They're busy blaming themselves. I shouldn't have this, I should have that they really keep the responsibility on themselves rather than, hey, this person needs some limits. Hey, this person acted inappropriately. I don't deserve this. So what I find for a lot of survivors is their self-talk needs a lot of work and can make a big difference. I mean, when I get someone to finally say, I shouldn't be treated this way, they like burst into tears. It's like, because they're so used to saying, I deserve this. I made a mistake. I did this or that. I'm blaming themselves. So I think that self-blame may be, in many ways, the biggest mistake because it doesn't fit. No one deserves to be hit. No one deserves to be controlled. I mean, kids have to be for their own safety, but no adult should be controlled by their partner. That's just not right, not healthy, and not what people deserve. So I'd say it's interesting. It's the self-talk, and self-talk you can change, and that's what's so important.
Absolutely. I think the escalation is often the information, right? It's not proof that you did something wrong. It's proof that the system was challenged and that this person might be a very high conflict personality or possibly disordered. I think that matters so much. Truthfully, this whole conversation matters so much because so many women are dealing with this. So many people are living inside these patterns and thinking that they caused it or thinking that they've done something to make this person behave this way when some people are just incredibly high conflict or pathological or character disturbed, as Dr. George Simon says.
But it's their personality and it's not something you can talk them out of. It's just part of who they are, especially when you see it repeat as a pattern.
Yes, absolutely. I want people to kind of shift from what did I do wrong? What did I do to cause this? To, what did my boundary just threaten?
Right. Yeah. It's the power and control. And any boundary threatens that. Yet you got to have boundaries for a healthy relationship.
Bill, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. I want everybody to find you online. Where is the best place for people to find your work?
Well, they can come to highconflictinstitute.com. We've got close to 100 free articles about managing high conflict situations. We've got books, we've got videos, and I mentioned 2 books, the Slick Solutions book, Setting Limits and Imposing Consequences in 2.5 Steps. So if you're interested, that's our most recent book. And the other, Splitting, Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder, which is a long subtitle, but it can be any high conflict situation. And it's good to read that before you announce that you want to separate if you end up wanting to separate. So you're prepared or the pushback and challenges and resistance to your setting boundaries. So all of this people can soak up, I think, and I really wish all of your people well.
Thank you so much.